I received the termination email just 3 days after my first round of chemotherapy. No phone call, no check-in, just a cold subject line. Employment terminated, effective immediately. I stared at the screen, my palms cold and my eyes burning. Not just from the meds, but from something deeper: disbelief. After over 2 decades of service at Halverson Freight, I was discarded like a rusted bolt in a machine I had spent years helping to build and maintain. And the reason they gave? Failure to meet current operational expectations during a critical period. They had reduced my cancer battle to a failure to perform. My name is Marianne Keller. I'm 57 years old and was the Northwest Regional Coordinator at Halverson Freight, a logistics firm based out of Denver. For 23 years, I'd never shown up late, never missed a report deadline, and never once complained about working overtime on holidays or weekends. It wasn't just a job. It was what I proudly called my second family. A place where I believed I had built something valuable, something irreplaceable. But then my body betrayed me. A wave of exhaustion after a long meeting sent me to the doctor, and none of us, not even the doctor, expected the scans to reveal an aggressive malignancy that had been quietly growing inside me for months. When I requested 2 weeks of leave to begin treatment, my supervisor, Greg Timmons, nodded, patted my shoulder, and said, "Take care of yourself. We've got things covered." I believed him. I believed in the kindness I thought I had helped nurture in this company. But it turns out, the only thing that wasn't covered was Maya, middle-aged woman fighting cancer in a workplace that measured value in unread emails and missed overtime. 3 days after leaving the hospital, I returned to my desk not even ready to reply to the kind messages my coworkers had sent when that email appeared. Cold, clinical, as if I were just a budget item that no longer made sense. With one click, my name disappeared from the company roster. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't call HR or beg for a meeting. I quietly took a screenshot of the email, sent it to my personal account, and began packing up my desk, a place that had cradled nearly a third of my life. And as I carefully wrapped the photo of our team from last year's holiday party in newspaper, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't the end of my story. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this: they weren't going to write my ending for me. I arrived at the office just after sunrise, moving slower than usual. Not because of fatigue, though; the chemo had left a dull ache in my bones, but because I still believed I had a place there. I thought maybe the email had been some administrative error, a mistake from a system that didn't understand nuance or humanity. I had even considered that Greg might pull me aside, apologize for the confusion, and assure me that my role, my contributions, still mattered. But the silence in the building, the way the lights flickered on one by one as I walked toward my desk, told me otherwise. The moment I stepped into my office, I saw the cardboard box someone had left on my chair blank, impersonal, waiting to swallow the remnants of nearly a quarter-century of service. My nameplate had already been removed from the door. The suddenness of it all struck deeper than the diagnosis ever had, because illness is random, but betrayal requires intent. I stood there for a long moment, trying to reconcile the warmth of the Christmas cards pinned on my corkboard with the icy finality of that box. My eyes landed on the small ceramic mug my assistant had gifted me 5 years ago, the one that read, "Best Boss in the West." And then I noticed the framed picture from the company's 20th anniversary gala, where Greg had toasted to Marianne, the rock of our logistics division. His voice still echoed in my mind, steady, warm, convincing. Now it rang hollow. Just as I began placing the first few items into the box, I heard footsteps. It was Sharon, from finance, her face wrinkled with concern. "Marianne, are you leaving?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was let go," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm, but each word tasted bitter. Apparently, chemotherapy doesn't align with our peak operational periods. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to quiet rage. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Does Greg know about this?" He signed the termination notice himself. That landed like a slap. She shook her head, murmured something I couldn't quite make out, and slowly backed away, as if realizing she had walked into something sacred, something broken. Not long after, more of my team began to arrive. One by one, they saw the box, saw the vacancy where my nameplate used to be, and they understood. I didn't have to explain it. The expressions on their faces: shock, sadness, Anger told me they knew this wasn't about performance. This was about a company that had chosen numbers over people, optics over loyalty. Daniel, my logistics analyst, was the first to speak. They let you go? Just like that? After what you've done, what you're still going through? I nodded, folding my scarf with slow, deliberate care. Greg didn't even have the decency to speak to me in person. But the new contract with North Traker Plans secured that deal. We all know it. I guess success has a short memory, I said, sealing a manila folder full of vendor agreements I had spent months negotiating. By mid-morning, 6 members of my core team had gathered near my office, their productivity forgotten in the quiet outrage that hung thick in the air. Elena, who had been with me the longest, stood with arms crossed, eyes glistening but her jaw set. You built this department. If they can do this to you, what does that say about the rest of us? Before I could answer, Greg appeared in the hallway. He didn't look surprised to see the crowd. In fact, he seemed mildly annoyed, like someone forced to walk into an uncomfortable social obligation. He cleared his throat and said, "We all need to get back to work. We have critical deadlines this week." No one moved. Their loyalty wasn't to the company anymore, it was to something larger, something that had a name, a face, and a voice that had guided them through late nights, tough clients, and relentless shipping seasons. Greg stepped closer, addressing me directly now. You could have waited until the end of the day to pack up. This display isn't helpful. I met his eyes with a calm I didn't feel, like the discretion you showed in terminating me by email after approving my medical leave. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Maybe he realized there was no way to justify what had happened without revealing what the company had become, a place where silence was policy and compassion a liability. Later that morning, I was ushered into HR. The room was stark, almost sterile, with white walls and chrome furniture that reflected the coldness of the moment. Angela, the HR manager, looked uncomfortable, like someone forced to hand out eviction notices during a snowstorm. "I'm truly sorry, Marianne," she said, pushing a few papers across the table. "This came down from upper management. I'd love to know who exactly that is," I replied, skimming the separation agreement. It offered 2 weeks' pay and a strict non-disparagement clause. "Is Greg considered upper management now?" She hesitated. "The board has been giving him more authority over departmental decisions, and letting go of a cancer patient 3 days after treatment is one of those decisions." Angela looked away, her hands folding and unfolding nervously. I think you should speak with legal." "I will," I said, placing the documents into my briefcase without signing. But not today. As I stepped outside into the crisp Denver morning, a text buzzed in my pocket. Then another, and another. Team members, friends, vendors, clients. Word was spreading fast. And it wasn't just indignation, they were angry. People don't always rally around titles or companies, but they do rally around decency. And in that moment, stripped of my badge and my office, I realized something unexpected. I hadn't lost my value. They had just lost their vision. I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice, nor did I ask for explanations that would have been coded in HR-approved euphemisms. There was no satisfaction to be found in arguments or shouting matches. Some losses aren't loud. They settle deep in the chest, where pride lives next to pain. And in that quiet place, I made a different kind of decision, not to fight the way they expected, but to endure the way they never saw coming. After leaving HR, I returned to my desk for the last time. The office had begun to fill, the low hum of morning chatter spreading like static in the background. No one had said anything outright, but people noticed how the pictures were gone from my walls, how the bookshelves were half empty, how my usually calm demeanor now moved with careful, deliberate finality. I kept my hands steady as I packed the remaining pieces of my working life. A worn notepad filled with handwritten logistics formulas, a photo of my son from his high school graduation tucked in the back of a drawer, and a tiny cactus gifted to me by my assistant on a random Tuesday after I'd pulled a 70-hour week to help the team recover from a system failure. I wrapped the pot gently in an old scarf, one of those soft knits I always kept draped over my chair for when the air conditioning turned the office into a refrigerator. By the time I stood up, my box was full, but my heart was not. It carried the weight of every late-night report, every quiet win, every mentor session I gave to help someone else rise. And now, All of it was being filed away with no more ceremony than a click of send. As I stepped into the corridor, I felt the shift the way conversations paused mid-sentence, how eyes trailed me not with pity, but with confusion, as if watching something they never thought they'd see. Terry, from distribution, reached out as I passed. "Marianne, what happened?" he asked, his voice already tinged with disbelief. I offered the faintest smile. "Apparently, I'm no longer aligned with the company's goals." His brow furrowed, his hands curling into fists. "After everything you've done? I guess the metrics didn't include loyalty," I said, walking on before the conversation could grow heavier. When I reached the elevator, I turned one last time. My team, my people were watching from their desks. Some stood. Others didn't bother to hide their dismay. No one looked away. In that shared silence, I saw something more powerful than protest. Solidarity. Not the kind that shouts or disrupts, but the kind that holds steady, like a bridge between what was lost and what could still be saved. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and just like that, I was gone. I walked through the lobby of Halverson Freight for the final time, each step echoing like a chapter ending not with rage, but with resolve. Outside, the fall wind carried a sharpness that cut through my coat, but I welcomed the sting. It reminded me I was still here, still standing. I placed the box in my trunk, sat behind the wheel, and let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For a brief moment, I stared at my hands on the steering wheel hands that had built shipping models, crafted proposals, written holiday cards by hand, and now sat still. But only for a moment. My phone vibrated in the cup holder on message, then another, then a flood. "Carmen, my junior coordinator, this is wrong. What can we do?" "Eli, the systems analyst. Greg's lost it. Are you okay?" "Linda from client relations. Just heard. We're with you." Every vibration reminded me of something they couldn't strip away: respect, earned honestly over years of showing up when it mattered most. They could take my title, my office, my email login, but they couldn't delete the loyalty I had nurtured through decency, consistency, and strength. I sat there for another few minutes, watching the leaves fall across the parking lot in lazy spirals. The same wind that blew them from the branches was now behind me too. It didn't matter what came next, not yet. What mattered was the shift within me. Quiet, but undeniable. I had given that company my best years, and they responded with an inbox notification. But they hadn't broken me. They hadn't even bent me. Because while they had been scrambling to replace roles with titles and metrics, I had been building something they couldn't measure: a foundation made of people, of loyalty, of quiet strength. As I turned the ignition and pulled out of the lot, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Whatever was coming, I was ready. Not to get even, not to strike back in anger, but to prove first to myself and then to the world that the story they tried to end wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days that followed passed in a quiet blur, the kind that settles after a storm but before the rebuilding begins. I spent time recovering from my treatment, physically drained but mentally sharper than I had felt in years, as if being forced into stillness had finally allowed the noise to clear. I took long walks by the river near my home in Aurora, the same river where I used to fish with my father when life felt too big to handle. He'd always said, "The current will pull, but the rock that holds doesn't need to push back to endure." I held on to that. On the third morning, as sunlight filtered through the kitchen window and I stirred sugar into my coffee with slow, steady hands, my phone rang. The name that flashed on the screen stopped me cold. Thomas Harlan, CEO of Blue Crest Logistics, one of the fastest growing firms in the region and, interestingly, Halverson Freight's biggest competitor. I hadn't spoken to Thomas since the trade conference in Portland nearly a year ago, but we had kept a courteous line of communication over the years. Still, I never expected him to call not like this. I answered, cautious. "Thomas?" "Marianne," he said warmly, but with an undertone of urgency. "I heard what happened. I wanted to reach out sooner, but I figured you might need some space." I paused, unsure how much he knew, but grateful for the acknowledgement. "It's been a week. A long one. I can only imagine," he said. Then, after a brief silence, "Let me get to the point. We've been expanding into the Western Corridor, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and we need someone to lead the entire regional operations. We were planning to start the search this quarter, but when I heard you were no longer at Halverson, the decision became clear. For a moment, I didn't answer. It was too unexpected, too soon, and yet, something inside me leaned toward it not out of spite, but out of a hunger I hadn't realized was still alive. The need to build, to lead, to matter again. I'm still under a non-compete, I said finally, setting down my coffee, my voice cautious but steady. 6 months. They tried to make it ironclad. Thomas chuckled softly. Our legal team already reviewed it. It's broad, overly restrictive, and given the circumstances of your dismissal, likely unenforceable in any serious court. We'd handle any legal pushback if it came to that. I hesitated, not because I doubted him, but because trust, once shattered, takes time to reassemble, even in fragments. What's the position? I asked, my voice measured, though my pulse had picked up. Vice President of Regional Operations, he replied. Full authority over staff, systems, and strategic planning. You'll be reporting directly to me. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. For years, I had plateaued beneath the ceiling at Halverson, never invited to the bigger meetings, always told I was too vital where I was to be moved. Now, here was an offer not just to return, but to rise. I'll need the weekend, I said, eyes scanning the faint outlines of frost on the lawn outside. I'm not saying no. I just need to be sure I'm ready to start again. Take what you need, he replied. But Marianne, I've seen the way your people talk about you. You're not just a leader. You're the kind of presence companies are built around. After we ended the call, I sat in silence for a while, processing everything. It wasn't just about career recovery. It was about rewriting the narrative Halverson had tried to finish in my name. They thought they had silenced me with a legal document and a 2-week severance, but they had underestimated the resilience of someone who had endured chemo without complaint and carried teams through storms without recognition. That evening, I met with Elena and Carmentwo, of my closest colleagues from Halversonat, a small family-owned diner on the east side of town. They had insisted, saying only, "You need to hear what's happening." From the moment they sat down, I knew the news wasn't small. They shared how the department had descended into chaos, how Greg had tried to reassign my projects but couldn't replicate the systems I'd put in place, and how even clients were beginning to notice something was off. He doesn't understand how you organize things, Carmen said. The structure was your she just inherited it. And it's not just logistics, Elena added. People are furious, quietly but deeply. Nobody trusts Greg anymore. They're watching their backs. I stirred my tea slowly, taking it all in. I received an offer, I told them. Bluecrest, vice president. I haven't accepted yet. They exchanged a look that didn't need words. Finally, Elena leaned forward, her voice low and intent. If you go and if there's room, we'd follow. For a long time, I didn't say anything. Not because I didn't believe them, but because I knew the gravity of what they were offering. They weren't just quitting a job, they were betting on me, on my judgment, on my integrity. I'm not going just to prove a point, I said finally. This has to be about something better. Not revenge, but purpose. Then lead us to it, Carmen replied. Because where we are now, there's no purpose left. That night, I sat at my desk at home, looking out over the lights of Aurora as they shimmered in the dark. I opened the draft contract Thomas had emailed me, read every clause, every line, and finally typed my name at the bottom. The next morning, I called him. I'm in, I said, but I want one condition added. Name it, he replied without hesitation. If any of my former colleagues apply, I want them given a fair shot. They're good people, loyal, smart, and they've been burned too. Done, he said. We'll need every one of them. As I clicked off the call, a calm strength settled over Minot, a rush, not euphoria, but something firmer. I had been cast out of one story, yes, but I wasn't lost. I was already writing the next one, and this time, I was holding the pen. It was just past 8 a.m. on Monday when I walked through the glass doors of Bluecrest Logistics. The lobby was bright with morning light, and the air had that quiet sense of purpose only a well-run organization carried. Calm, focused, alive, with momentum. Thomas met me with a firm handshake and a small smile that said more than any welcome banner could. My first official day had arrived, but it already felt like I had been part of this place far longer than the ink had dried. The office they'd given me looked out over downtown Aurora with wide windows that caught the shifting light of early autumn. I had just begun organizing my files and reviewing the onboarding plan when my phone lit up. 7 new messages had arrived each from someone who had once stood silently at my desk while I packed my things at Halverson. Elena, Carmen, Eli, Patrick, Linda, Shay, and Rosa. One by one, they had reached out, each asking the same question in different words. Can we meet? I agreed without hesitation. We chose a quiet corner table at Brighton Cafe, a modest spot tucked between a bookstore and an antique shop, the kind of place where conversations were meant to linger and no one eavesdropped. I arrived early, not because I needed to prepare, but because part of me still carried the weight of what they'd all endured, the weight of knowing I had left them behind in the wreckage of a collapsing culture, even if I had no other choice. Elena was the first to appear, her coat still unbuttoned as she made her way to the table. Then came Carmen and Eli, followed closely by the rest. Before long, we had pulled together 2 tables, the low hum of their conversation weaving together like a familiar melody. The moment they were all seated, the smiles faded slightly, replaced by something heavier urgency, frustration, and a longing for something more than what they had left behind. Halverson is falling apart, Eli said bluntly, leaning forward, his fingers tight around his coffee mug. Greg is micromanaging every decision, and Paula's been in meetings with legal almost every day. People are leaving, clients are asking questions, and no one knows what to say. Linda nodded, her expression weary. The North Track deal is in jeopardy. They've been calling the front office nonstop asking for you, and when they heard you were gone, the tone changed immediately. I let them speak, allowing the dam to break without interrupting. They had held so much in fear, resentment, guilt for staying, guilt for even thinking of leaving. And now, with me sitting across the table again, they finally had space to let it out. We heard you join Bluecrest, Rosa said quietly. Is it true? I met her eyes, steady and calm. Yes, I started today. And? Patrick asked. Is it what you hoped it would be? Is what we were promised at Halverson but never truly given, I said. Respect, resources, real leadership. But I didn't come here to gloat. Shay leaned in then, her voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. We've already applied, all of us, the second we saw the open listings under your division. I blinked, startled. You applied before talking to me? We didn't want to put you in a position, Elena added quickly. But we trust you, and frankly, we're done waiting for things to get better where we are. A pause settled between us, heavy but not uncomfortable. I looked around the table at these people, these professionals who had once helped build the most efficient department in Halverson's history. They were more than coworkers. They were the bones of a legacy I refused to let die in someone else's hands. I'll speak with HR, I said. No promises, but you'll get fair consideration. That much I can assure you. Their collective sigh was almost imperceptible, but I felt it. Relief mixed with the kind of trust that doesn't come from titles or tenure, but from battlefields, shared deadline sprints, cross-country shipments rerouted at midnight, storms weathered side by side. 2 days later, Thomas stopped by my office, a stack of resumes in his hand. 7 applicants, all from Halverson, he said with a smile. You must have built quite the team. I didn't build them, I replied. I gave them the room to rise, they did the rest. He nodded. Interviews start tomorrow. That Friday, all 7 had received offers. And the following Monday, they walked into Bluecrest's offices, not as stragglers from a sinking ship, but as a team reunited stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. We didn't celebrate with champagne or speeches. Instead, we ordered takeout, pulled chairs into the conference room, and shared quiet stories over lunch. Stories of chaos, of sudden audits, of Greg's paranoia and Paula's mounting silence, but also stories of hope of what it meant to have a second chance, not handed down, but earned through loyalty and quiet perseverance. That afternoon, as I passed by the operations floor and saw them all at their desks, heads down and focused, I realized something profound. Halverson hadn't lost just employees. They had lost their future. Because people don't follow salaries or titles. They follow belief. And these 7 had chosen to believe in me, in each other, in something better. 3 months passed in what felt like the breath between two lifetimes, just long enough for things to change and short enough for memories to remain vivid. At Bluecrest, our team had not only stabilized the Western Division, but transformed it. We increased performance metrics across every department, acquired 3 major clients, and reduced operational costs by over 20% while building a culture that finally matched the words so many companies like to print in glossy brochures but rarely lived by. I had just wrapped up our quarterly performance presentation to the executive board when Thomas approached me with a quiet smile and a firm nod. 32% growth, he said, gesturing to the final slide still glowing on the wall. Your division is outperforming every forecast. I offered a small, measured smile in return, the kind that doesn't seek praise but acknowledges shared effort. It's the team, I said, and meant it. They didn't just follow me here. They brought their best with them. He nodded again. Whatever Halverson failed to recognize, we won't make that mistake. After the meeting, I returned to my office and found the 7 of them, Elena, Carmen, Eli, Patrick, Shay, Linda, and Rosa waiting with a chocolate cake from the bakery down the street and a handwritten card that simply read, 3 months strong, together. I laughed, not the polite office laugh reserved for awkward holiday parties, but a real full laugh that cracked open something inside me I hadn't realized was still closed. As I looked around at each of them settled in, confident, fulfilled, I saw not just redemption, but rebirth. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. Later that afternoon, a notification buzzed on my phone. It was a news alert from the local business journal. Halverson Freight announces restructuring amid executive shakeup. I clicked through and read the headline slowly, my eyes scanning the familiar names. Greg Timmons had stepped down, though the article noted it was under pressure from the board. Paula, too, had exited quietly, replaced by a consultancy firm now auditing all past HR practices, particularly around terminations and protected leave policies. I didn't feel joy knot, the kind most people imagine when they think of revenge. I felt something far better. Peace. It wasn't about watching them fall. It was knowing I had chosen not to destroy, but to build. And that decision had led to something no scandal or policy shift at Halverson could ever take away: dignity, respect, and real leadership. The next morning, I received a package at my desk. Inside was a small ceramic pot wrapped in newspaper, the same cactus I left behind in my old office. There was a note taped to the side, written in familiar handwriting. Found this in your drawer. Figured you might want it back now, Angela. I placed the pot on the windowsill beside my desk where the light hit just right, and for a long moment I simply looked at it. It had survived, despite being forgotten, and in its quiet endurance, I saw the story of us all. That evening, I walked along the river trail near my home, the same one I used to wander during my worst days of treatment. The air was cooler now, touched by the early signs of winter, but it was clear, and the river moved steadily, without apology or hesitation. I stopped at the bend where the current swirled hardest, and I thought of my father again, of his voice, gravelly yet gentle, reminding me that you don't have to fight the current if you become the rock beneath it. Looking back on everything, on the betrayal, the silence, the quiet strength it took not to break, and the courage it took to begin again, I finally understood what revenge really meant. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about taking anything back. It was about building something so whole, so human, and so undeniable that it made the very place that rejected you look like the shadow it always was. So, to those watching this who feel forgotten, discarded, or devalued because of illness, age, or circumstance, I see you, and I want you to remember this. Your worth is not measured by the company that lets you go, but by the life you build afterward. Sometimes the strongest answer isn't retaliation, it's resurrection. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever stood in silence while the world moved on without you, or if you're searching for proof that new beginnings can still rise from broken places, subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who needs it. Here, we honor the quiet warriors, the underestimated hearts, and the ones who rise without rage. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply becoming everything they said you'd never be.